The steam of the cedarwood kettle was the last thing that made sense. It rose in a delicate, white spiral, a ghost of peace in the center of the house of the falling moon, just as the heavens decided to vomit iron and fire. My name is Suzu, and I have spent 20 years mastering the Ma, the space between heartbeats, only to find that the stars possess a rhythm that defies the logic of men. I stood in the upper chamber of the tea house, the scent of matcha still heavy on my tongue, when the first star needle pierced the roof. It didn't crash, it sliced. The obsidian spike hummed a low, vibrating note that shattered every sake bottle in the building before the first invader even breathed our air. The shoji screens, once beautiful lattices of paper and wood, disintegrated into white confetti. From the jagged hole in the ceiling, the plasma threaders descended. They were not solid like us. Their bodies were cages of translucent, chitinous ribs, their heads encased in domes of shifting, bioluminescent violet gas. They didn't carry swords. They carried handles of dark, cold glass that, with a sharp hiss, unleashed 6-foot lashes of white-hot plasma. The first whip struck the floor. The tatami mats didn't just burn, they sublimated into a toxic gray mist. I didn't reach for a prayer. I reached for the rack on the northern wall. My fingers found the familiar, cold grip of the moon mirror Naginata. It was a weapon of old steel, tempered in the icy waters of the Kiso River, but its blade had been edged with a rare, dark mineral found in a crater a decade ago. It was a blade meant for killing things that shouldn't exist. The first threader moved. It didn't walk, it drifted, its joints clicking like 1,000 needles. It lashed out with its right-hand whip, a horizontal arc designed to bisect me at the waist. I didn't retreat. To retreat was to die in the confined space of the tea house. I dived forward, my sapphire armor clattering against the floor, rolling beneath the humming violet light. The heat of the plasma was so intense it singed the silk of my undertunic through the gaps in my plates. I came up from the roll and drove the butt of the Naginata into the alien's lower rib cage. The chitin cracked with a sound like shattering porcelain. A spray of neon blue fluid hit the floor, hissing as it ate through the wood. The creature let out a high-pitched, digital shriek, its head dome flashing a frantic, angry red. "You bleed light," I hissed, finding my footing. "Let's see how much you have left." The second threader engaged. It was faster, its whips weaving a web of violet death around the central pillars. It moved with a terrifying insectoid grace, leaping onto the walls and ceiling, its lashes cutting the heavy silk tapestries that hung from the rafters. The tapestries, masterpieces of gold thread and crimson silk, fell in burning heaps, creating a labyrinth of fire between us. I entered the crane's vigil stance, the Naginata held high. I watched the movement of the silk. The plasma whips were powerful, but they were energy. They possessed weight and friction when they struck physical matter. As the second threader lashed out again, I spun the Naginata in a tight vertical circle, catching the plasma lash around the shaft of my weapon. The heat was agonizing. The wood of the Naginata began to smoke, but the dark mineral edge held. I pulled. I used the alien's own momentum to drag it from the ceiling. The threader crashed onto a low tea table, the wood splintering under its weight. Before it could recover, I stepped onto its chest and drove the curved blade of the Naginata through its head dome. The violet gas erupted. It wasn't an explosion of fire, but a burst of cold, pressurized vacuum. I was thrown backward, my sapphire plates slamming into the balcony railing. I gasped for air, my lungs feeling as though they had been filled with ice. The first threader was back on its feet. It had seen its kin die, and its head dome was no longer violet. It was a solid, murderous obsidian black. It began to spin its whips, creating a localized vortex of plasma that acted as a shield. It moved toward me, the sheer heat of its presence turning the air into a shimmering haze. "Suzu." "The tapestries." It was a voice from below, one of the servants who hadn't fled. It was a reminder. "The silk." I looked at the burning heaps of crimson fabric on the floor. I didn't have the strength to break the plasma vortex with steel alone. I had to use the environment. I grabbed a long, unburnt section of the Imperial Dragon tapestry, a heavy, reinforced silk banner that hung from the main beam. I wrapped the end around the hook of my Naginata and leaped. I wasn't attacking the alien. I was weaving. I swung around the central pillar, the silk banner trailing behind me like a blue and gold ribbon. I passed the threader twice, the plasma whips cutting into the silk, but the heavy fabric took the brunt of the heat. In a heartbeat, I had entangled the alien's plasma vortex in 10 layers of high-grade silk. The energy whips, caught in the fibers, began to overload, the violet light bleeding into the fabric and turning it into a glowing, unstable cage. "Corridorida. This is the end." I yanked the banner. The entangled plasma whips were pulled inward, the energy collapsing back onto the alien's own chassis. The threader shrieked as its own weapons began to melt its chitinous armor. I lunged through the smoke, my Naginata leading the way. I drove the blade into the center of the obsidian dome, twisting the steel with every ounce of my remaining strength. The white-hot core of the creature detonated. This time the explosion was absolute. The upper floor of the House of the Falling Moon was blown outward, the cedar walls disintegrating into a cloud of splinters and blue sparks. I felt the floor vanish beneath me. I was falling through a world of orange fire and sapphire light. I hit the garden pond below with a bone-jarring impact. The cold water was a mercy, extinguishing the fire on my armor and numbing the burns on my skin. I pulled myself onto the mossy bank, my breath coming in ragged, wet gasps. I looked up. The tea house was a skeleton of burning timber, the gold leaf roof collapsing into the inferno. The star needle was still there, embedded in the earth like a tombstone from a distant galaxy. The violet glow was gone. The humming had stopped. I looked at my hands. The silk of my gloves was gone, my palms blistered and gray. My Naginata lay beside me, its blade notched and blackened, but it hadn't broken. It had held the line. The village of Mino was quiet. No more cylinders were falling. No more screams echoed from the hills. For now, the weavers of the stars had been unraveled. I sat in the damp moss, the sapphire lacquer of my armor reflecting the first true stars of the evening. They looked cold. They looked distant. They no longer looked like gods, they looked like targets. I reached out and gripped the shaft of my weapon, the charcoal scent of the burning house mixing with the honest smell of the damp earth. The tea ceremony was finished. The steam had vanished. The silk was ash. I stood up, my armor clanking in the silence of the garden. I didn't look back at the ruin. I walked toward the mountains, a lone blue shadow in a world that had just learned that the heavens can bleed. The water of the pond settles, reflecting a sky that is once again silent. The fire consumes the cedar, but the shadow remains cold, moving through the bamboo until the light of the burning house is nothing but a memory of a red sun. The Naginata is heavy, the path is steep, and the night belongs to the blade. The wind carries the ash into the dark, and the earth continues its slow, indifferent turn. I am Suzu, and I am the last thing the stars will see before they fade.